The bass thumped through the walls of the crowded Brooklyn bar, a pulse that matched the racing heart of Elliot Harper. He stood at the edge of the dance floor, a half-empty beer in hand, watching strangers lose themselves in the neon glow. Then he saw him, a man whose presence cut through the haze like a blade, and Elliot's world tilted. Caleb Monroe moved like he owned the room, his body swaying with a dancer's grace, every step deliberate, every smile a weapon. His warm brown skin caught the flickering lights, and his dark eyes held a spark that felt like a dare. Elliot, a 28-year-old painter with a knack for seeing beauty in chaos, couldn't look away. Their eyes met across the room, and in that instant, something unspoken passed between them: a promise, a risk, a fire. Another drink. A friend shouted over the music, but Elliot barely heard. He was already moving, drawn to Caleb like a moth to flame. They collided in the middle of the dance floor, bodies close, the air thick with sweat and anticipation. Words were unnecessary. Their hands found each other, and the world blurred. Hours later, in the quiet of Elliot's cramped apartment, their clothes hit the floor, and the night became a tangle of whispers, laughter, and skin. It was supposed to be simply one-night thing, a fleeting escape from the monotony of Elliot's life. But nothing about Caleb felt simple. Morning came too soon. Caleb was gone by the time Elliot woke, leaving only a scribbled note on the nightstand. Thanks for the night. Maybe I'll see you around. See. Elliot stared at the note, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. He told himself it was nothing, just a hookup, a moment that would fade like the others. He was wrong. Elliot's life in New York was a patchwork of half-finished canvases and late-night gigs as a bartender. He'd grown up in a small town upstate, a place where being openly gay was less a choice and more a battle. He'd left at 18, chasing freedom in the city, but the weight of his past clung to him like damp clothes. His cousin, Sarah, was the only family he still spoke to, a bright, fiercely loyal woman who'd stayed in their hometown, planning her dream wedding to a man she called the one. Elliot hadn't met her fiancé yet. Sarah insisted on keeping it a surprise until the rehearsal dinner. "You'll love him," she'd said over the phone, her voice bubbling with excitement. Elliot smiled at the thought, happy for her, but his mind kept drifting back to Caleb. Weeks passed, and Caleb's note sat untouched on Elliot's dresser, a quiet reminder of a night that refused to fade. He tried to paint, to lose himself in his art, but every stroke felt like a memory of Caleb's touch. He checked his phone obsessively, hoping for a message that never came. The bar became a haunt, a place where he searched for Caleb's face in every crowd. But the dancer was a ghost. Elliot told himself to let it go, to move on, but his heart wouldn't listen. Then came the call from Sarah. "Elliot, you're coming to the wedding, right? I need you there." Her voice was warm but insistent, pulling him back to the life he'd left behind. He agreed, packing a bag and boarding a train to the small town of Willow Creek, a place where time seemed to stand still. The rolling hills and quiet streets felt suffocating, a stark contrast to the city's chaos. But Sarah's joy was infectious, and Elliot found himself smiling as he arrived at her family's old farmhouse, where the rehearsal dinner was set to take place. The house was alive with laughter and the clink of glasses. Sarah greeted him with a hug, her blonde hair tied back, her eyes sparkling. "You're gonna love him," she said again, leading him inside. Elliot scanned the room, nodding at familiar faces, until his gaze landed on a man standing by the fireplace, talking animatedly with Sarah's parents. The world stopped. It was Caleb. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. Caleb looked different here, polished in a button-up shirt, his charm turned up to 11 as he worked the room. But those same dark, daring eyes met Elliot's. And for a moment, they were back in that bar, bodies pressed together, hearts racing. Then Sarah's voice broke the spell. "Elliot, come meet my fiancé." The word hit like a punch. Fiancé. Caleb was Sarah's fiancé. The man Elliot had spent one unforgettable night with was about to marry his cousin. Elliot forced a smile, his mind reeling as he shook Caleb's hand, feeling the warmth of his grip, the same grip that had held him so tightly weeks ago. Caleb's expression was unreadable, a mask of politeness that hid whatever he was feeling. "Nice to meet you," Caleb said, his voice smooth but laced with something Elliot couldn't decipher. Dinner was a blur. Elliot sat across from Caleb, watching him laugh with Sarah, his hand resting on hers. Every glance between them felt like a knife twisting in Elliot's chest. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but he stayed silent, trapped in a storm of confusion and betrayal. Had Caleb known who Elliot was that night? Was it all a game? Or had fate played a cruel trick on them both? As the night ended, Caleb caught Elliot alone in the hallway. "We need to talk," he whispered, his voice low, urgent. Elliot's heart pounded, but before he could respond, Sarah called Caleb back to the party. The moment passed, leaving Elliot with 1,000 questions and no answers. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of his childhood bedroom, replaying every second of their night together. It wasn't just a hookup. It couldn't be. But what was it then? And what was he supposed to do now? The morning sun filtered through the farmhouse windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Elliot barely slept, his mind caught in a loop of Caleb's smile, Caleb's touch, Caleb's hand on Sarah's. He dragged himself to the kitchen, where Sarah was already buzzing with wedding preparations. "You okay, Elle?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she handed him a coffee. He nodded, forcing a smile, but the weight of last night's revelation pressed against his chest like a stone. The rehearsal was set for noon at Willow Creek's only church, a quaint stone building with stained glass windows that glowed like jewels. Elliot arrived early, hoping the quiet would steady him. Instead, it gave him too much time to think. He sat in the back pew, staring at the altar where Caleb and Sarah would stand tomorrow, vowing to love each other forever. The thought made his stomach churn. He wasn't in love with Caleb not yet, but that night had cracked something open inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Desire. A chance at something real. And now, it was slipping away. Caleb arrived with Sarah, their laughter echoing as they walked down the aisle, practicing their steps. Elliot watched from the shadows, his heart a battlefield of longing and guilt. Caleb's eyes flicked toward him, just for a second, and Elliot felt it again, that electric pull, the unspoken truth hanging between them. The rehearsal dragged on, each moment a test of Elliot's composure. He wanted to confront Caleb, to demand answers, but every time he tried to get him alone, someone interrupted: a cousin, an aunt, Sarah herself. Finally, during a break, Caleb slipped outside to the church garden, and Elliot followed. The air was crisp, scented with roses and impending rain. Caleb stood by a stone fountain, his back to Elliot, his shoulders tense. "You knew," Elliot said, his voice low but sharp. "You knew who I was that night, didn't you?" Caleb turned, his expression a mix of defiance and regret. "I didn't know, Elliot. Not until I saw the family photos at Sarah's house a week later." His voice was soft, almost pleading. "That night, it wasn't planned. I didn't expect to feel anything." "Then why didn't you call?" Elliot stepped closer, his fists clenched. You left a damn note and vanished. And now you're marrying my cousin. Caleb's jaw tightened. I love Sarah. I've loved her for years. That night with you was a mistake. A moment of weakness. The words stung, but Elliot saw the crack in Caleb's armor. The way his eyes lingered too long. The way his hands twitched as if fighting the urge to reach out. A mistake. Elliot repeated, his voice breaking. You felt it too, Caleb. Don't lie to me. Caleb looked away, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I can't do this to her. She's everything to me. You don't understand. Then make me understand. Elliot's voice rose, raw with desperation. Because I can't stop thinking about you, and I hate myself for it. Before Caleb could respond, Sarah's voice called from the church, pulling him back inside. Elliot stayed in the garden, his heart pounding, the roses blurring through unshed tears. He wanted to hate Caleb, to hate Sarah, to hate himself, but all he felt was a hollow ache. He returned to the rehearsal, playing his part as the supportive cousin, but every smile was a lie. That night, at the rehearsal dinner, Elliot watched Caleb and Sarah dance under string lights in the backyard. They looked perfect together, a picture of love and certainty. But when Caleb's eyes met Elliot's across the crowd, there was no mistaking the turmoil beneath his calm exterior. Elliot excused himself, retreating to the porch, where he lit a cigarette, a habit he'd quit years ago but picked up again in the chaos of the past 24 hours. Sarah found him there, her wedding dress rehearsal behind her, her face glowing with happiness. You're quiet tonight, she said, sitting beside him. What's going on? Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess the truth and let it burn. But the words wouldn't come. Just tired, he lied, hating himself for it. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, and for a moment, they were kids again, sharing secrets under the stars. But this secret was too heavy, too dangerous. He couldn't break her heart, not yet. As the night wound down, Caleb approached him again, this time in the driveway, away from prying eyes. We can't keep doing this, Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow, I'm marrying Sarah. It's done. Then why are you out here talking to me? Elliot shot back, his voice thick with emotion. If it's done, why can't you look me in the eye and mean it? Caleb's silence was answer enough. They stood there, inches apart, the tension between them a living thing. Then Caleb turned and walked away, leaving Elliot alone in the dark, the weight of tomorrow pressing down on him like a storm. The wedding day dawned bright and merciless, the kind of clear summer morning that promised joy to everyone but Elliot. He stood in front of the mirror in his childhood bedroom, adjusting his tie, his reflection a stranger. Today, Caleb would marry Sarah, and Elliot would have to watch, smile, and pretend his heart wasn't breaking. The church was packed, every pew filled with friends, family, and townsfolk who'd known Sarah since she was a girl. Elliot sat near the front, his hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. The organ began to play, a soft hymn that felt like a funeral march to him. Sarah appeared first, radiant in her white dress, her smile so wide it lit up the room. Elliot's chest ached with love for her and guilt for the secret he carried. Then Caleb walked down the aisle, and time slowed. He looked impossibly handsome in his tailored suit, his steps steady but his eyes searching. When they landed on Elliot, they lingered, and for a moment, the world was just the two of them. Elliot's breath hitched, his mind screaming at him to do something, anything to stop this before it was too late. But he stayed frozen, trapped by duty and fear. The ceremony began, and every word from the pastor felt like a nail in Elliot's heart. He watched Caleb and Sarah exchange vows, their voices steady, their love undeniable. But he saw the cracks too, the way Caleb's hands trembled when he slid the ring onto Sarah's finger, the way his eyes flicked to Elliot during the quiet moments. It wasn't just Elliot's imagination. There was something unresolved, something alive between them, and it was tearing him apart. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, Elliot's heart pounded so loudly he thought everyone could hear it. He imagined standing up, shouting the truth, letting it all come crashing down. But he didn't. He couldn't. Sarah deserved her happiness, and Caleb had made his choice. The moment passed, and the congregation clapped as the couple kissed, sealing their vows. The reception was held in a barn just outside town, its rafters strung with fairy lights, the air thick with the scent of barbecue and wildflowers. Elliot moved through the crowd like a ghost, smiling when spoken to, but his eyes never strayed far from Caleb. He danced with Sarah, laughing as she twirled him, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed answers, closure, something to make sense of the chaos inside him. Late in the evening, he found Caleb alone by the bar, nursing a drink. The music was softer now, the crowd thinning as the night grew late. "We need to talk," Elliot said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Now." Caleb nodded, and they slipped outside, away from the laughter and lights. The night was cool, the stars bright above the rolling hills. "What do you want from me, Elliot?" Caleb asked, his voice raw. "I'm married now. It's over." "Is it?" Elliot challenged, stepping closer. "Because you don't look like a man who's sure of anything right now." Caleb's eyes darkened, his breath uneven. "You think this is easy for me? I love Sarah. I've loved her since we were kids. But that night with you," he trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "It messed me up. Okay. I didn't expect to feel anything like that." "Then why didn't you tell her?" Elliot's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I'm not like you." Caleb snapped, his voice rising. "I can't just be out, be free, like you are in the city. I grew up here, Elliot. You know what it's like. You know what people say, what they do. Sarah was my safe place, my future. I can't throw that away." Elliot's heart twisted. He understood, more than he wanted to. He'd lived that fear, that suffocating need to hide who he was. But it didn't make the pain any less. So what was I? Just an experiment. A mistake you could walk away from. Caleb's eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked like the man from that night in Brooklyn, vulnerable and real. "You were more than that," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "And that's what scares me." They stood there, the distance between them both vast and non-existent. Elliot wanted to reach out, to pull Caleb close, to demand he choose. But he didn't. He couldn't destroy Sarah's happiness, couldn't force Caleb to confront a truth he wasn't ready for. Instead, he turned and walked away, the weight of his silence heavier than ever. The days after the wedding blurred into a haze for Elliot. He returned to New York, to his cluttered apartment and unfinished paintings. But the city felt emptier now. Caleb's confession lingered like a bruise, tender and impossible to ignore. He tried to paint, to pour his pain onto the canvas. But every stroke felt wrong, every color too dull. He was haunted by what could have been, by the truth Caleb wasn't ready to face. Sarah called a week later, her voice bright with honeymoon stories. "Caleb's been so sweet," she said, oblivious to the storm she'd stirred. You two got along, right? I saw you talking at the reception. Elliot mumbled something vague, his heart twisting. He wanted to hate Caleb, to hate Sarah, but he couldn't. They were both trapped in their own ways, Sarah by her love, Caleb by his fear, and Elliot by his silence. He threw himself into his work, taking extra shifts at the bar, sketching until his hands ached. But Caleb's face was everywhere, in the strangers on the subway, in the shadows of his dreams. He started going back to the bar where they'd met, hoping against hope to see him again, to find some closure. It was irrational, he knew, but rationality had abandoned him the moment Caleb walked down that aisle. One rainy evening, 3 months after the wedding, Elliot's phone buzzed with an unknown number. His heart stopped when he heard Caleb's voice. "I'm in the city," Caleb said, his tone urgent. "Can we meet?" They met at a quiet cafe in the village, far from the pulsing energy of their first encounter. Caleb looked tired, his usual charm dimmed by something heavier. "Sarah's pregnant," he said after a long silence, his eyes fixed on his coffee. "I should be happy. I am happy. But what?" Elliot pressed, his voice barely steady. Caleb looked up, his eyes raw with emotion. "I can't stop thinking about you. About that night. About what it meant." Elliot's breath caught. He dreamed of this moment, of Caleb admitting the truth. But now that it was here, it felt like a trap. "You're married, Caleb. You have a kid on the way. What are you saying?" "I don't know," Caleb admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought I could bury it, pretend it didn't happen. But every time I look at Sarah, I feel like I'm lying to her. To myself." Elliot wanted to scream, to shake Caleb until he made sense. Instead, he reached across the table, his hand brushing Caleb's. The touch was electric, a reminder of everything they'd left unsaid. "You can't keep running from this," Elliot said softly. "But you have to choose. Not for me, not for Sarah, but for you." Caleb pulled his hand away, his expression tormented. "I don't know how to do that, Elliot. I don't know how to be this." They sat in silence, the rain tapping against the cafe windows. Elliot wanted to fight for him, to pull him out of the shadows, but he knew it wasn't his battle. Caleb had to find his own way. "I'm here," Elliot said finally. "When you're ready, I'm here." Caleb nodded, his eyes glistening. They parted ways in the rain. No promises made, no answers found. Elliot walked home, soaked to the bone, feeling both lighter and heavier than before. He didn't know if he'd see Caleb again, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope, not for them, but for himself. Back in his apartment, he picked up a brush and began to paint. The colors were vivid now, the strokes bold. He painted Caleb's eyes, Sarah's smile, the church, the bar, the rain. He painted his pain, his love, his truth. And for the first time in months, he felt like he was breathing again. A year passed, and Elliot's life began to take shape again. His paintings were selling, his name whispered in the city's art circles. He'd found a fragile peace, a way to live with the ache of Caleb's absence. He still thought of him, of course, but the pain had softened, like a scar that no longer stung. He'd even started dating again, though nothing felt quite right. Sarah called often, sharing updates about her life with Caleb and their newborn daughter, Lily. She sounded happy, and Elliot was grateful for that, even if it hurt to hear. Caleb never reached out, and Elliot didn't expect him to. Some stories didn't get neat endings, he told himself. Some loves were meant to burn bright and fade. Then, one spring evening, Elliot was invited to an art gallery opening in Manhattan. His latest Seriasa collection of raw, emotional portraits inspired by his time in Willow Creek was the talk of the event. He mingled with collectors and critics, his heart swelling with pride. But when he turned to grab a drink, he froze. Caleb was there, standing by one of his paintings, his eyes fixed on the canvas. It was a portrait of that night in Brooklyn, abstract but unmistakable. Caleb's figure was a swirl of color and motion, his eyes rendered with such intimacy that it felt like a confession. Caleb looked up, meeting Elliot's gaze, and the room fell away. "I didn't know you were an artist," Caleb said, his voice soft but steady. It's us, isn't it?" Elliot nodded, his throat tight. "It's how I remember you." They stepped outside, the city humming around them. Caleb looked different now, older, more grounded, but still breathtaking. "I left Sarah," he said, the words heavy with meaning. "Not because of you, but because I couldn't keep lying. I told her everything. About that night. About me." Elliot's heart raced. "How is she?" "She's hurt," Caleb admitted. "But she's strong. She's moving on. We're co-parenting Lily, trying to make it work." He paused, his eyes searching Elliot's. "I spent so long being afraid, Elliot. Afraid of who I am, of what people would think. But seeing your painting, it made me realize I can't hide anymore." Elliot took a shaky breath, hope and fear colliding inside him. "What does this mean, Caleb? For us?" Caleb smiled, a small, tentative thing. "I don't know yet. But I want to find out. If you'll let me." They stood there, under the glow of a street lamp, the city alive around them. Elliot thought of Sarah, of the pain they'd all carried, of the love that had nearly destroyed them. But he also thought of the future, of the possibility of something new, something honest. He reached for Caleb's hand, and this time, Caleb didn't pull away. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, judgments, and scars to heal. But as they walked into the night, hand in hand, Elliot felt a weight lift. Love wasn't perfect, and neither were they. But it was real, and for the first time, that was enough.